What if I told you that some of the most profound truths about reality come wrapped in contradictions that seem impossible to solve? What if the very questions that have puzzled humanity's greatest minds for thousands of years could fundamentally change how you see yourself, your choices, and your place in the universe? Before we dive into these mind-bending paradoxes, if you're someone who loves exploring the deeper questions of existence, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We regularly explore philosophy, consciousness, and the big questions that shape our understanding of reality. Now, what exactly is a philosophical paradox? At its core, a paradox is a statement or situation that appears contradictory or absurd, yet when examined closely, reveals deeper truths about reality. These aren't just intellectual puzzles, they're windows into the fundamental nature of existence itself. The paradoxes we'll explore today have shaped thousands of years of human thought. They've influenced everyone from ancient Stoics to modern quantum physicists, from religious mystics to cutting-edge neuroscientists. More importantly, they have the power to reshape how you navigate your daily life, make decisions, and understand your place in the cosmos. Each paradox we'll examine has been chosen not just for its intellectual fascination, but for its practical impact on how we live, love, and find meaning in our brief time here on Earth. Let's begin our journey into the beautiful, confusing, and ultimately transformative world of philosophical paradoxes. Paradox 1. The Ship of Theseus, our first paradox, takes us back to ancient Athens, where the legendary hero Theseus returned from slaying the Minotaur. The Athenians preserved his ship as a monument to his victory. But over the centuries, as the wooden planks rotted, they replaced them one by one with new timber. Here's the question that has haunted philosophers for over 2,000 years. After every single plank, sail, and rope has been replaced, is it still the same ship? But wait, it gets even more mind-bending. What if someone collected all the original rotted planks and reassembled them into a ship? Now which one is the real ship of Theseus? This isn't just an abstract puzzle about boats. This paradox strikes at the very heart of identity itself. Consider your own body. Every cell in your body is replaced approximately every 7 to 10 years. The atoms that make up your brain, your heart, your hands weren't there a decade ago. So are you the same person you were 10 years ago? The implications are profound and deeply personal. When you say, "I remember my childhood," who exactly is this I doing the remembering? If your physical substance has completely changed, what maintains the continuity of your identity? Some philosophers argue that identity lies in continuity of memory and consciousness. You are you because you remember being you. But this raises new questions. What about forgotten memories? What about people with amnesia or dementia? Do they stop being themselves? Others suggest that identity is more like a river, constantly flowing and changing, yet maintaining a recognizable pattern. The River Thames is still the Thames, even though none of the water molecules from a century ago remain. This paradox transforms how we think about personal growth and change. Instead of clinging to a fixed sense of self, we might embrace the reality that we are dynamic beings, constantly becoming rather than simply being. This shift in perspective can be incredibly liberating. It means you're not trapped by past mistakes or limited by current circumstances. You are always in the process of becoming a new version of yourself. The Ship of Theseus teaches us that identity might not be a thing we have, but a process we undergo. This realization can fundamentally change how you approach personal development, relationships, and the meaning of authenticity in your life. Paradox 2. The Socrates paradox. Imagine you have a heap of sand containing 10,000 grains. If you remove one grain, you still clearly have a heap. Remove another grain, still a heap. But here's the puzzle. At what exact point does it stop being a heap? This ancient paradox, known as the Socrates paradox from the Greek word soros, meaning heap, reveals something profound about the vague boundaries that define our world. It's not just about sand. This paradox applies to virtually every concept we use to navigate reality. When does a child become an adult? When does someone go from healthy to sick? At what point does a friendship turn into love? When does a collection of houses become a city? The uncomfortable truth is that most of the categories we use to organize our experience have fuzzy, undefined borders. This vagueness isn't a flaw in language or thinking. It's a fundamental feature of how reality actually works. The world doesn't come prepackaged with clear-cut boundaries. Instead, it exists in gradients, spectrums, and continuous flows that resist our attempts to impose rigid categories. Understanding the Sorites paradox can transform how you navigate complex situations in life. Instead of seeking black and white answers, you learn to embrace nuance and uncertainty. This is particularly powerful in relationships, where people often demand clear definitions. Are we dating or just friends? Do you love me or not? The paradox suggests that many meaningful states exist in the beautiful, ambiguous spaces between categories. It also changes how you approach personal goals and habits. Instead of viewing success as a binary state you either achieve or don't, you can appreciate the gradual accumulation of small improvements. Each day you exercise, each book you read, each act of kindness you perform adds one grain to the heap of who you're becoming. The Sorites paradox teaches us that wisdom often lies not in demanding precise definitions, but in learning to navigate uncertainty with grace. It reminds us that the most important aspects of human experience, love, wisdom, happiness, meaning, exist in the vague, indefinable spaces that logic struggles to capture, but life abundantly provides. This acceptance of vagueness isn't intellectual laziness. It's sophisticated recognition that reality is far richer and more complex than our conceptual categories can contain. Embracing this complexity allows for more compassionate relationships, more adaptive decision-making, and a deeper appreciation for the beautiful ambiguity of existence. Paradox 3. Zeno's paradoxes. Picture this: the legendary hero Achilles, fastest of all mortals, races against a tortoise. To make it fair, the tortoise gets a head start. Logic tells us Achilles should easily win. But the ancient philosopher Zeno argued that Achilles can never actually overtake the tortoise. Here's why. Before Achilles can pass the tortoise, he must first reach the point where the tortoise started. But by the time he gets there, the tortoise has moved a little further ahead. Now Achilles must reach this new point, but again, the tortoise has advanced slightly. This process continues infinitely. Achilles is always catching up, but never overtaking. This paradox, along with Zeno's other famous puzzles about motion, reveals something profound about the nature of space, time, and infinity. To walk across a room, you must first walk halfway. But before you can walk halfway, you must walk a quarter of the way. Before that, an eighth. Since you can divide any distance infinitely, Zeno argued that all motion is impossible. Yet here you are, moving through space, reading these words, living your life in apparent defiance of logical proof that motion cannot exist. Zeno's paradoxes illuminate a fundamental tension between our lived experience and rational analysis. They show us that reality operates on principles that sometimes transcend our logical frameworks. This isn't a failure of logic. It's a revelation about the limits of purely rational approaches to understanding existence. In practical terms, Zeno's paradoxes offer profound insights into how we approach goals and progress in life. How often do you feel paralyzed by the infinite number of steps required to achieve something meaningful? Want to write a novel? That's hundreds of pages. Want to learn a language? That's thousands of words and countless grammar rules. Want to build a meaningful career? It requires decades of skill development and relationship building. The paradox teaches us that focusing on the infinite subdivision of tasks can create a kind of psychological paralysis. Instead of getting lost in the overwhelming magnitude of what lies ahead, we can learn to trust in the process of taking the next step. Motion happens not by solving the logical puzzle, but by moving despite it. Zeno's insights also apply to personal transformation. Change often feels impossible when we focus on the infinite gap between where we are and where we want to be. But transformation, like motion, happens through the accumulation of infinitely small moments. Each thought, each choice, each breath moves us forward in ways that rational analysis cannot fully capture. These paradoxes remind us that some of life's most essential experiences, growth, love, creativity, meaning, operate on principles that transcend pure logic. They invite us to trust in processes that we cannot fully understand, but can definitely experience. Paradox 4. The liar paradox. Now we encounter one of philosophy's most elegant and disturbing puzzles. This statement is false. Take a moment to really consider this sentence. If the statement is true, then it's false, because it claims to be false. But if it's false, then it must be true, because it accurately describes itself as false. We're trapped in an infinite loop of contradiction that seems to have no resolution. This is the liar paradox, and it reveals something profound about the nature of truth, language, and self-reference. It's not just a clever word game. It points to fundamental limitations in how we use language to describe reality, including the reality of language itself. The paradox becomes even more unsettling when we realize how often we encounter similar self-referential loops in daily life. Consider the statement, "I am not the kind of person who says they're not the kind of person who ... Or think about the psychological trap of telling yourself, "I shouldn't be thinking about this." These loops reveal something crucial about consciousness itself. Your awareness is constantly turning back on itself, observing its own processes, judging its own judgments, thinking about thinking. This self-referential nature of consciousness creates both the richness of human experience and some of its deepest confusions. The liar paradox has practical implications for how we understand identity and self-knowledge. When you say, "I don't know who I am," who is the I making this claim? When you declare, "I'm not good enough," what authority does this I have to make such judgments about itself? These questions aren't just philosophical games, they're central to psychological well-being. Much suffering comes from taking our self-referential thoughts too seriously, from believing that the voice in our head that narrates and judges our experience is somehow the ultimate authority on who we are. The paradox suggests a more humble approach to self-knowledge. Perhaps the aspects of ourselves that try to define and understand ourselves are inherently limited. Maybe the very attempt to capture the totality of our being in concepts and statements leads us into logical knots that cannot be untied through more. Thinking this insight can be profoundly liberating. Instead of trying to solve the puzzle of who you are through endless self-analysis, you might learn to rest in the mystery of being aware, of being the space in which thoughts and experiences arise and pass away. The liar paradox reminds us that truth, consciousness, and identity are far stranger and more mysterious than our everyday language suggests. It invites us to hold our self-concepts lightly, to be curious rather than certain about the nature of our own experience. Paradox 5. The paradox of choice. Here's a paradox that touches your daily life in the most practical ways. The more choices you have, the less happy you become with whatever you choose. Walk into any modern grocery store and you'll face 30 different types of breakfast cereal, 50 varieties of shampoo, and countless options for every conceivable product. This explosion of choice, which should theoretically make us happier and more fulfilled, often leads to anxiety, regret, and a persistent sense that we might have chosen wrong. Psychologist Barry Schwartz illuminated this paradox through extensive research showing that beyond a certain point, additional options don't increase satisfaction, they decrease it. When people have too many choices, they experience decision paralysis, take longer to decide, and are less satisfied with their eventual choices. But the paradox goes deeper than consumer psychology. It touches the very heart of human freedom and autonomy. We live in an era of unprecedented choice about careers, relationships, lifestyles, beliefs, and identities. This freedom, which previous generations could only dream of, can become a burden that leaves us constantly questioning whether we're living the right life. The paradox reveals a fundamental tension in human nature. We desire autonomy and control over our circumstances, yet we also crave the security and simplicity that come with fewer options. We want freedom, but freedom without guidance can feel like wandering in a wilderness of possibilities. Consider how this plays out in modern relationships, with dating apps providing access to thousands of potential partners. Many people find it increasingly difficult to commit to any single relationship. There's always the possibility that someone better is just a swipe away. The abundance of choice that was supposed to help us find our perfect match often prevents us from appreciating the good matches we already have. The same dynamic affects career decisions. When you can theoretically pursue any career path, how do you choose? The fear of making the wrong choice can keep you paralyzed in jobs that don't fulfill you, constantly wondering about the roads not taken. But here's where the paradox becomes transformative. Recognizing it can free you from the tyranny of endless optimization. Instead of seeking the perfect choice, you can learn to make good choices and then commit to making those choices work. This shift from maximizing to satisficing, choosing options that meet your criteria rather than endlessly searching for the absolute best, can dramatically improve your quality of life. It allows you to move from constantly second-guessing yourself to investing your energy in making your choices meaningful. The paradox of choice teaches us that freedom isn't just about having options. It's about having the wisdom to choose well and the commitment to embrace your choices fully. Sometimes the most liberating thing you can do is to voluntarily limit your options, creating constraints that paradoxically increase your satisfaction and peace of mind. Paradox 6. The bootstrap paradox. Imagine you travel back in time and teach Beethoven to compose his Fifth Symphony. You learn the symphony from Beethoven himself, who learned it from you. So who actually created this masterpiece? This mind-bending scenario illustrates the bootstrap paradox, also known as a causal loop. The paradox gets its name from the impossible act of pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, creating something from nothing through a circular chain of causation. While time travel scenarios make this vivid, the deeper implications touch fundamental questions about creativity, knowledge, and the nature of existence itself. Consider how this applies to the stories we tell about our lives. You might say, "I became confident because people believed in me." But why did people believe in you? Perhaps because you showed confidence. Which came first, your confidence or others' belief in you? Often, these qualities bootstrap each other into existence through circular reinforcement. The same pattern appears in relationships. Two people fall in love partly because they see that they're loved in return. Their love exists because it exists, sustained by the very fact of its mutual recognition. This isn't a logical flaw. It's how many of the most meaningful aspects of life actually work. The bootstrap paradox reveals something profound about human potential and self-creation. Much of who you become emerges through circular processes where you act as if something is true. Which makes it true? Which justifies your original action? Confidence creates situations that justify confidence. Kindness generates responses that validate kindness. Faith in your abilities develops abilities that justify faith. This insight can be transformative for personal development. Instead of waiting to feel confident before acting confidently, or waiting to feel worthy before treating yourself as worthy, you can step into these qualities and allow them to bootstrap themselves into reality. The paradox also illuminates how cultural knowledge and traditions perpetuate themselves. Ideas survive because people believe they're worth preserving, and people believe they're worth preserving because they've survived. Scientific paradigms, artistic movements, and social values often bootstrap themselves into prominence through this kind of circular causation. But the bootstrap paradox also carries a warning about negative patterns. Self-defeating beliefs can bootstrap themselves just as effectively as empowering ones. If you believe you're unlucky, you might unconsciously create situations that confirm your unluckiness, which reinforces your belief in being unlucky. Understanding this paradox gives you power to examine the circular patterns in your own life. Which self-reinforcing loops are serving you, and which ones are limiting you? How might you consciously bootstrap new qualities into existence by acting as if they're already true? The bootstrap paradox suggests that much of reality isn't based on linear cause and effect, but on circular, self-sustaining patterns. This means you have more power to shape your experience than you might think. Not by changing external circumstances, but by stepping into new patterns that can bootstrap themselves into reality. Paradox 7. The paradox of tolerance. Here's a paradox that's particularly relevant in our interconnected, pluralistic world. Should a tolerant society tolerate intolerance? Philosopher Karl Popper articulated this dilemma clearly. If we are completely tolerant of all viewpoints, including intolerant ones, we risk having tolerance itself destroyed by those who would use our openness to impose their own rigid dogmas. Yet if we become intolerant of intolerant views, are we not betraying the very principle of tolerance we claim to uphold? This isn't just an abstract philosophical puzzle. It plays out daily in personal relationships, workplace dynamics, community interactions, and political discourse. How do you remain open-minded without being naive? How do you set healthy boundaries without becoming closed-minded? The paradox reveals the complex relationship between values and their application. Pure tolerance sounds virtuous in theory, but in practice, it can enable harmful behaviors and ideologies that ultimately destroy the conditions that make tolerance possible. This suggests that meaningful tolerance isn't passive acceptance of everything, but active commitment to maintaining the conditions where diverse viewpoints can coexist. Think about how this applies to your personal relationships. If you're unconditionally accepting of a friend's behavior, you might enable patterns that harm both them and others. Yet if you become judgmental and controlling, you destroy the trust and openness that make friendship meaningful. The challenge is finding the balance between acceptance and accountability. The same tension appears in parenting, leadership, and teaching. How do you create space for growth and exploration while maintaining necessary boundaries? How do you foster independence while preventing harmful choices? The paradox of tolerance suggests that healthy boundaries aren't contradictions of openness. They're what make genuine openness possible. A garden needs walls, not to exclude nature, but to create protected space where delicate plants can flourish. Similarly, tolerance needs boundaries to create protected space where diverse perspectives can engage constructively. This realization can transform how you approach conflict and disagreement. Instead of seeing every boundary as intolerance or every acceptance as weakness, you can learn to set limits that preserve space for authentic dialogue and growth. This might mean refusing to engage with arguments made in bad faith, while remaining open to genuine differences of opinion. The paradox also illuminates the importance of distinguishing between tolerating people and tolerating behaviors. You can maintain fundamental respect for someone's humanity while setting clear boundaries around actions that cause harm. This distinction allows for both compassion and accountability. Perhaps most importantly, the paradox of tolerance reminds us that values like tolerance, freedom, and respect aren't self-maintaining. They require active cultivation and protection. The price of tolerance isn't just vigilance against obvious threats, but the wisdom to discern which boundaries serve tolerance and which boundaries destroy it. Paradox 8. The paradox of hedonism. Here's a paradox that strikes at the heart of how most people approach happiness. The more directly you pursue pleasure and avoid pain, the less happy you become. This counterintuitive principle suggests that happiness is like sleep. The harder you try to force it, the more elusive it becomes. People who organize their entire lives around maximizing pleasure and minimizing discomfort often find themselves trapped in cycles of dissatisfaction, constantly seeking the next experience that will finally deliver lasting fulfillment. The paradox isn't arguing against enjoyment or pleasure. to revealing something subtle about how satisfaction actually works. Happiness seems to arise most naturally as a byproduct of engagement with meaningful activities, relationships, and challenges, rather than as a direct goal in itself. Consider how this plays out in everyday life. When you're completely absorbed in an activity you find meaningful, whether it's creating art, solving problems, helping others, or connecting deeply with friends, you often experience a kind of effortless satisfaction. You're not thinking about happiness, you're simply engaged. Yet these moments often contain more genuine fulfillment than deliberate attempts to make yourself happy. The same pattern appears in relationships. The happiest couples aren't those who focus primarily on their own happiness, but those who focus on contributing to each other's growth and well-being. Paradoxically, by shifting attention away from personal satisfaction toward mutual flourishing, both partners often experience deeper contentment. This insight revolutionizes how you might approach personal development. Instead of asking, "What will make me happy?" you might ask, "What activities and relationships allow me to contribute meaningfully?" Instead of organizing your life around avoiding discomfort, you might ask, "What challenges are worth embracing?" The paradox of hedonism also explains why many traditional wisdom traditions emphasize service, discipline, and acceptance of difficulty. These approaches aren't anti-happiness. They're based on the recognition that sustainable satisfaction emerges from engaging fully with life, rather than trying to control your emotional states. But the paradox goes deeper than personal psychology. It reveals something fundamental about the nature of consciousness itself. Awareness naturally tends toward engagement with whatever is present. When you try to manipulate your experience to match preconceived ideas about happiness, you're working against this natural flow. This doesn't mean becoming passive or accepting everything uncritically. Instead, it suggests a more skillful approach to well-being, cultivating the capacity to engage fully with whatever life presents, finding meaning in both pleasure and difficulty. The paradox also illuminates the difference between genuine contentment and mere pleasure-seeking. Contentment includes the ability to be at peace with unpleasant experiences, while pleasure-seeking creates constant dependency on external circumstances. One leads to resilience and inner stability. The other leads to anxiety and endless craving. Understanding this paradox can free you from the exhausting project of trying to engineer your own happiness, instead of constantly monitoring your emotional temperature and trying to adjust it. You can invest your energy in activities and relationships that naturally generate meaning and connection. Paradox 9. The paradox of knowledge. I know that I know nothing. These words, attributed to Socrates, capture one of philosophy's most profound paradoxes. The more you genuinely learn, the more you realize how much you don't know. True knowledge seems to increase ignorance rather than eliminate it. This isn't just intellectual humility or false modesty. It's a recognition that reality is so vast and complex that every answer opens up new questions, every solution reveals new problems, and every piece of understanding illuminates vast territories of mystery. When you first encounter a subject, it often appears relatively simple and contained. You might read one book about psychology and feel you understand how the mind works. But as you delve deeper, you discover the intricate interactions between neuroscience, culture, genetics, experience, and countless other factors. What seems straightforward becomes fascinatingly complex. This paradox transforms how you approach learning and expertise. Instead of accumulating knowledge like collecting objects, you begin to see learning as an ongoing process of deepening relationship with mystery. The goal isn't to eliminate uncertainty, but to become more comfortable navigating it skillfully. The paradox of knowledge has profound implications for how you hold opinions and beliefs. When you recognize the vastness of what you don't know, you naturally become more curious and less dogmatic. Instead of defending fixed positions, you become interested in exploring different perspectives and updating your understanding based on new information. This shift from knowing to curiosity can revolutionize your relationships. Instead of trying to prove you're right or convince others to agree with you, you become genuinely interested in understanding their perspectives. Conversations become opportunities for mutual discovery rather than debates to be won. The paradox also applies to self-knowledge. The more deeply you examine your own mind, motivations, and patterns, the more mysterious you become to yourself. This isn't a failure of introspection. It's recognition that consciousness itself is far more complex and subtle than any conceptual understanding can capture. This realization can be simultaneously humbling and liberating. Humbling because it reveals the limitations of intellectual understanding. Liberating because it frees you from the impossible task of figuring everything out before you can live fully. In practical terms, the paradox of knowledge suggests approaches to decision-making that embrace uncertainty rather than demanding complete information. You learn to make good decisions with incomplete data, to act wisely despite not knowing all the consequences, and to remain open to course corrections as new understanding emerges. The paradox also illuminates the difference between information and wisdom. Information can be accumulated and stored, but wisdom emerges from the recognition of how much remains unknown. A wise person isn't someone who has all the answers, but someone who asks better questions and remains comfortable with mystery. Perhaps most importantly, this paradox invites you to approach life with what Zen traditions call beginner's mind. The attitude of openness and eagerness that comes from recognizing you're always at the beginning of understanding. This perspective keeps learning fresh and prevents the stagnation that comes from thinking you already know enough. Paradox 10. The paradox of free will. Our final paradox might be the most personally challenging of all. Do you actually have free will? Or is your sense of choice merely an illusion created by a brain that doesn't understand its own deterministic processes? Modern neuroscience presents evidence that brain activity associated with decisions begins several hundred milliseconds before people report being conscious of making those decisions. This suggests that what we experience as conscious choice might actually be the brain's after-the-fact rationalization of processes that were already set in motion unconsciously. At the same time, quantum mechanics reveals that the universe operates with fundamental randomness at its most basic level. But randomness isn't the same as freedom. Your choices are determined by quantum coin flips. Are they really yours in any meaningful sense? Yet here's the paradox. Regardless of what neuroscience or physics might suggest about the ultimate nature of choice, you cannot live as if your decisions don't matter. Even the most committed determinists look both ways before crossing the street and deliberate carefully about important life decisions. This creates a strange situation where you must act as if you have free will, while simultaneously recognizing that the nature of choice is far more mysterious than it appears. You exist in the space between determinism and freedom, neither fully controlled nor completely autonomous. But rather than being merely confusing, this paradox points toward a more sophisticated understanding of human agency. Perhaps free will isn't about being completely independent of all influences, but about being able to respond creatively to circumstances rather than merely reacting mechanically. Consider how this plays out in personal growth. You might not choose your initial thoughts, emotions, or impulses, but you do seem to have some capacity to influence how you respond to them. You can't control what arises in your mind, but you can cultivate the ability to observe these arisings with greater awareness and choose more skillful responses. This understanding transforms how you think about responsibility and blame. If your actions emerge from complex interactions between genetics, environment, experience, and immediate circumstances, harsh self-judgment becomes less compelling, yet you still have the capacity to learn from mistakes and make different choices going forward. The paradox also illuminates the relationship between effort and surrender. You can work diligently toward goals while simultaneously recognizing that outcomes depend on factors beyond your control. This balance between agency and acceptance is central to both effectiveness and peace of mind. In relationships, understanding this paradox can increase both compassion and accountability. People's behavior emerges from complex causes you can't fully understand, which suggests patience and empathy. Yet people also have the capacity to grow and change, which justifies holding them accountable for their actions. Perhaps most profoundly, the paradox of free will invites you to embrace the mystery of your own agency. You are neither completely in control nor completely helpless, neither fully determined nor absolutely free. You exist in the creative space between these extremes, where choice and circumstance dance together in ways that logical analysis cannot fully capture. Now that we've journeyed through these 10 mind-bending paradoxes, you might be wondering, how do these abstract philosophical puzzles actually change your daily life? The beauty of these paradoxes isn't that they provide clear answers, but that they transform the questions you ask. Instead of seeking certainty, you learn to navigate uncertainty with greater skill. Instead of demanding simple solutions, you develop comfort with complexity and ambiguity. The Ship of Theseus reminds you that identity is fluid and dynamic, freeing you from rigid self-concepts that limit growth. The Socrates paradox helps you embrace the beautiful vagueness of important life categories, rather than demanding impossible precision. Zeno's paradoxes teach you to trust in processes that transcend logical analysis. The Liar paradox reveals the limitations of self-referential thinking, suggesting a lighter relationship with your internal narrative. The paradox of choice shows how constraints can increase satisfaction, while the bootstrap paradox illuminates your power to create new realities through circular processes. The paradox of tolerance guides you in setting healthy boundaries that preserve space for genuine openness. The paradox of hedonism redirects your attention from pursuing happiness to engaging meaningfully with life. The paradox of knowledge cultivates intellectual humility and curiosity. Finally, the paradox of free will helps you balance personal responsibility with compassionate acceptance of human limitation. Together, these paradoxes suggest a way of living that's simultaneously more humble and more empowered, more accepting and more engaged, more peaceful and more dynamic. They invite you to hold your beliefs lightly while caring deeply about your actions, to embrace mystery while thinking clearly, to accept uncertainty while making committed choices. The goal isn't to solve these paradoxes, but to let them solve you. To allow them to dissolve the rigid mental habits that create unnecessary suffering and limitation. They're invitations to a more fluid, curious, and compassionate way of being in the world. Let's explore how these paradoxes can be woven into practical frameworks for navigating daily life with greater wisdom and satisfaction. First, consider developing what we might call paradoxical thinking. The ability to hold contradictory ideas simultaneously without needing immediate resolution. This isn't intellectual confusion, but sophisticated cognitive flexibility. When facing difficult decisions, instead of seeking the right answer, you can explore how different perspectives might all contain partial truths. For instance, in career decisions, you can simultaneously appreciate the security of your current job while being excited about new opportunities. You don't need to resolve this tension immediately. You can let both perspectives inform your choices without forcing premature clarity. The paradoxes also suggest an approach to personal development that's more organic and less forced. Instead of trying to engineer specific outcomes, you can create conditions that allow natural growth to emerge. Like a gardener who prepares soil and provides water but can't force plants to grow. You can cultivate habits and environments that support flourishing without demanding particular results. This applies powerfully to emotional well-being. Rather than trying to eliminate negative emotions or maximize positive ones, you can learn to create space for whatever arises. This paradoxical approach, accepting what you'd prefer to change, often leads to more genuine transformation than direct attempts at emotional control. The paradoxes also inform a more skillful approach to relationships. You can love someone completely while accepting that you don't fully understand them. You can commit deeply to relationships while remaining open to how they might evolve. You can set clear boundaries while maintaining compassion for those whose behavior necessitates those boundaries. In creative endeavors, the paradoxes suggest embracing both discipline and spontaneity, structure and freedom, planning and improvisation. The most fulfilling creative work often emerges from this dance between apparent opposites rather than from choosing one approach exclusively. Recent neuroscientific research provides fascinating insights into what happens in your brain when you engage with paradoxes. These findings help explain why paradoxical thinking can be so transformative and how you can cultivate this capacity. When your brain encounters contradictory information, it typically activates the anterior cingulate cortex, a region associated with conflict detection and resolution. Initially, this can create discomfort as your mind searches for ways to eliminate the contradiction. However, with practice, you can learn to rest in this state of cognitive tension without immediately seeking resolution. This tolerance for cognitive dissonance appears to be associated with increased activity in the prefrontal cortex, particularly areas involved in executive function and emotional regulation. People who are comfortable with ambiguity show greater neural flexibility and more creative problem-solving abilities. Meditation practices, which often involve paradoxical instructions like try to not try or accept what you cannot accept, seem to strengthen neural pathways associated with this kind of flexible thinking. Regular meditation practitioners show increased gray matter density in brain regions associated with attention, emotional regulation, and self-awareness. The default mode network, a set of brain regions active during rest and introspection, also plays a crucial role in paradoxical thinking. This network is involved in self-referential processing and mind-wandering, but it can become overactive in ways that create rigid self-concepts and repetitive thought patterns. Engaging with paradoxes seems to temporarily disrupt default mode network activity in beneficial ways, creating space for new perspectives and insights to emerge. This might explain why philosophical contemplation often leads to sudden shifts in understanding or aha moments. Interestingly, the brain's response to paradoxes shares similarities with its response to humor. Both involve the sudden recognition of unexpected connections or the resolution of apparent contradictions. This might explain why engaging with philosophical paradoxes often feels simultaneously challenging and enjoyable. The neuroplasticity research suggests that regularly engaging with paradoxical thinking literally rewires your brain in ways that increase cognitive flexibility, emotional resilience, and creative capacity. This isn't just metaphorical. Your neural pathways actually change in response to how you think about thinking. Throughout history, many of humanity's greatest thinkers, artists, and innovators have found inspiration in paradoxes rather than being paralyzed by them. Understanding how they navigated contradictions can provide practical guidance for your own journey. The ancient Chinese concept of yin and yang embodies paradoxical thinking at its finest. Rather than seeing opposing forces as problems to be solved, this framework recognizes them as complementary aspects of a dynamic whole. Light and dark, active and passive, growth and decay. All are understood as necessary parts of natural cycles rather than conflicts requiring resolution. Similarly, the medieval mystic Meister Eckhart wrote extensively about spiritual paradoxes, describing God as simultaneously the fullest presence and the most complete emptiness. His insights weren't abstract theology, but practical guidance for living with greater depth and authenticity. The Renaissance artist Leonardo da Vinci exemplified paradoxical thinking in his approach to both art and science. He could be simultaneously incredibly detail-oriented and broadly visionary, methodically scientific and wildly creative, deeply curious about the world and profoundly introspective about consciousness itself. In more recent times, physicist Niels Bohr famously said, "How wonderful that we have met with a paradox. Now we have some hope of making progress." His approach to quantum mechanics embraced contradictions rather than avoiding them, leading to revolutionary insights about the nature of reality. The poet Walt Whitman captured this spirit beautifully. "Do I contradict myself? Very well then, I contradict myself. I'm large. I contain multitudes. This wasn't intellectual sloppiness, but recognition that human experience is far too rich and complex to be captured by consistent, non-contradictory descriptions. These historical examples suggest that embracing paradox isn't a modern philosophical luxury. It's a fundamental aspect of wisdom that has guided human flourishing across cultures and centuries. Now let's explore specific practices that can help you integrate paradoxical thinking into your daily experience. These aren't just intellectual exercises. They're ways of training your mind to navigate complexity with greater skill and satisfaction. The both and practice. When you catch yourself thinking in either or terms, experiment with both and formulations. Instead of "I need to be more disciplined," or more self-compassionate, try "I can be both disciplined and self-compassionate." Notice how this shifts your internal experience and opens up new possibilities for action. The opposite day exercise. Once a week, deliberately explore the opposite of your usual perspective on a challenging situation. If you typically see a problem as entirely negative, spend time genuinely exploring its potential benefits. If you usually blame external circumstances, consider how you might be contributing to the situation. This isn't about changing your mind, but about expanding your capacity to hold multiple viewpoints. The Identity Fluidity Meditation. Inspired by the Ship of Theseus paradox. Spend 10 minutes contemplating the question, "Who am I?" without trying to answer it definitively. Notice the different aspects of identity that arise: your roles, your history, your values, your experiences, and observe how they all coexist without needing to be resolved into a single, consistent self-concept. The Vagueness Appreciation Practice. Choose something in your life that you usually try to define precisely, like success, happiness, or a relationship status. Spend time deliberately appreciating its vague boundaries. Notice how this acceptance of ambiguity affects your stress levels and decision-making. The Paradoxical Intention Technique, when struggling with an unwanted mental or emotional state. Try the counterintuitive approach of intentionally experiencing it more fully rather than fighting it. If you're anxious, be more anxious on purpose. If you're sad, allow yourself to be completely sad. Often, this paradoxical approach dissolves resistance and allows natural change to occur. The Beginner's Mind Journal. Each evening, write about one thing you thought you understood well, but realized you actually know very little about. This could be anything from how your smartphone works to why people behave the way they do. Cultivating this recognition of ignorance paradoxically increases wisdom. The Constraint Liberation Exercise. When facing a creative challenge or major decision, deliberately impose artificial constraints that seem to limit your options. Notice how these limitations often spark more creativity and clearer choices than unlimited freedom would provide. Contemporary psychology has increasingly recognized the therapeutic power of paradoxical interventions, validating what philosophers have understood for millennia. Sometimes the path forward goes through apparent contradictions rather than around them. Acceptance and Commitment Therapy Act is built around several paradoxes. It suggests that trying to control your thoughts and emotions is often what keeps you stuck, while accepting them as they are creates space for change. The therapy teaches psychological flexibility, the ability to stay present with difficult experiences while taking action guided by your values. This approach directly applies the insights from our paradoxes. Instead of trying to eliminate anxiety, depression, or other unwanted states, ACT helps people develop a different relationship with these experiences. The goal isn't to feel good all the time, but to live meaningfully, regardless of how you feel. Dialectical Behavior Therapy (DBT) explicitly embraces paradoxical thinking through its concept of dialectics, the ability to hold two seemingly opposite truths simultaneously. Clients learn to accept themselves as they are and commit to change, to validate their emotions and challenge unhelpful thoughts, to be independent and seek support when needed. mindfulness-based interventions also rely on paradoxical principles. The instruction to observe your thoughts without thinking about your thoughts is logically impossible, yet practically transformative. The paradox of trying not to try, of making effort to be effortless, opens up new ways of relating to mental activity. Even cognitive behavioral therapy, often seen as more straightforward than these other approaches, frequently uses paradoxical techniques. Clients might be asked to schedule worry time to practice having the thoughts they're trying to avoid, or to behave as if they already possess the confidence they're trying to develop. These therapeutic applications demonstrate that paradoxes aren't just philosophical curiosities, they're practical tools for psychological healing and growth. They work because they mirror the inherently paradoxical nature of consciousness itself. The business world, despite its reputation for preferring clear-cut solutions, increasingly recognizes the value of paradoxical thinking in leadership and organizational development. The most effective leaders often excel at navigating tensions rather than resolving them. Consider the paradox of confidence and humility. Great leaders must project confidence to inspire others while remaining humble enough to learn and adapt. They need to make decisive decisions with incomplete information while staying open to new data that might require course corrections. Similarly, effective organizations must balance stability and innovation, efficiency and creativity, individual autonomy and team collaboration. Companies that try to optimize only one side of these equations often struggle, while those that embrace the tension between seemingly opposite values tend to thrive. The concept of servant leadership embodies this paradoxical thinking. Leaders serve best by empowering others to lead, gain authority by giving it away, and succeed by helping others succeed. This isn't logical in conventional terms, yet it often produces remarkable results. In team dynamics, the most productive groups often maintain what researchers call psychological safety. Environments where people feel safe to take risks, make mistakes, and express dissenting opinions. This requires leaders to be simultaneously supportive and challenging, accepting and demanding, encouraging and truthful. The paradox of control also applies powerfully in organizational contexts. Micromanaging attempts to increase control often decrease actual influence, while giving people autonomy often increases alignment with organizational goals. The leaders who hold outcomes lightly while caring deeply about process often achieve better results than those who grip tightly to specific outcomes. These organizational applications of paradoxical thinking aren't just about business success. They create more humane workplaces where people can bring their full selves to their professional roles. Many of the world's spiritual traditions are built around fundamental paradoxes that point toward truths beyond logical understanding. These ancient insights align remarkably with the philosophical paradoxes we've explored and offer practical guidance for living with greater depth and authenticity. The Christian mystic tradition speaks of dark nights of the soul, periods where spiritual dryness paradoxically deepens faith. The very experience of God's absence becomes a form of presence. This paradox suggests that spiritual growth often involves moving through apparent regression rather than around it. Buddhism presents the paradox of seeking liberation from seeking itself. The desire for enlightenment can become another form of attachment that prevents the very freedom it aims toward. This leads to practices that simultaneously involve great effort and complete surrender, intense concentration and total relaxation. The Hindu concept of neti neti not this uses paradox as a method of inquiry. By recognizing what you are not, you may discover what you are. But this isn't a process of elimination leading to a final answer. It's an ongoing recognition of the mystery that you are. In Islamic mysticism, the concept of fana involves the paradoxical dissolution of the individual self in order to discover the true self. The ego must die for authentic being to be born. This isn't psychological suicide, but recognition that what you thought you were was always limited compared to what you actually are. These spiritual paradoxes aren't exotic beliefs for religious specialists. They're practical, pointing toward how consciousness works at its deepest levels. They suggest that the very sense of being a separate, self-seeking fulfillment might be the root of dissatisfaction, and that recognizing this paradox can open up entirely new ways of experiencing life. The seeking itself becomes the obstacle to finding, yet without seeking, you might never discover this truth. This isn't meant to be logically resolved, but lived as an ongoing dance between effort and grace. Striving and surrender, knowing and unknowing. The creative process itself is deeply paradoxical, which explains why many artists, writers, musicians, and other creative individuals are naturally drawn to paradoxical thinking. Understanding these creative paradoxes can help anyone tap into their creative potential more effectively. The central paradox of creativity is that you must know the rules thoroughly in order to break them meaningfully. Master painters spend years learning realistic representation before developing abstract styles. Jazz musicians master traditional forms before improvising freely. Writers study grammar and structure before finding their unique voice. This suggests that true creativity emerges from the tension between constraint and freedom. Tradition and innovation, discipline and spontaneity. The most original work often comes from deep engagement with existing forms rather than from attempting to create something entirely new from scratch. Another creative paradox involves the relationship between intention and surprise. You must have a clear vision for your work while remaining open to unexpected discoveries that might completely transform that vision. The best creative work often emerges from this dance between planning and improvisation. The paradox of vulnerability and strength also plays a crucial role in meaningful creative expression. Artists must be willing to expose their most tender truths while having the courage to share them publicly. This requires simultaneous sensitivity and resilience, openness and boundaries. There's also the time paradox of creativity. The way that rushing often slows progress while slowing down often accelerates results. Many creative breakthroughs happen during periods of apparent inactivity, when the conscious mind relaxes and allows unconscious processes to operate. The audience paradox suggests that creating for everyone often reaches no one, while creating something deeply personal often touches universal themes that resonate widely. The most broadly appealing work frequently emerges from the most specifically individual expression. Understanding these creative paradoxes can transform how you approach any form of creative expression, whether professional or personal, artistic or practical. Perhaps nowhere are paradoxes more evident than in human relationships, where the deepest connections often emerge through navigating apparent contradictions with skill and grace. The fundamental paradox of intimate relationships is that you must maintain your individual identity in order to genuinely merge with another person. Losing yourself in relationship creates codependency rather than connection, while remaining completely separate prevents true intimacy. The healthiest relationships exist in the dynamic tension between autonomy and unity. There's also the vulnerability paradox. The way that revealing your weaknesses often increases rather than decreases others' respect for you. Authentic connection requires the courage to be seen as you actually are, including aspects you might prefer to hide. Yet this apparent risk often creates the safety that allows deeper bonds to form. The communication paradox suggests that the most important conversations often involve discussing what cannot be fully expressed in words. The deepest sharing happens in the spaces between words and the quality of presence you bring to listening, in the willingness to be with each other without trying to fix or change anything. In romantic relationships, there's the passion paradox. The way that grasping tightly to maintain excitement often kills it, while holding lightly often allows it to flourish. The very security that makes long-term relationship possible can also make it feel less exciting. Yet attempts to artificially create insecurity usually backfire. The forgiveness paradox appears when couples discover that letting go of resentment serves their own well-being more than it serves their partner. What appears to be generous actually turns out to be self-serving. Yet this self-interest paradoxically enables greater generosity. Parent-child relationships embody the paradox of loving someone so much that you're willing to let them go. Good parenting involves providing both security and challenge, both acceptance and guidance, both protection and opportunities to face appropriate risks. Friendship paradoxes include the way that not needing friends makes you more attractive as a friend, and how maintaining some mystery often deepens intimacy more than complete transparency does. Our culture's relationship with success and failure is riddled with paradoxes that, when understood, can dramatically change how you approach goals, setbacks, and achievement. The effort paradox suggests that trying harder often produces worse results, while relaxing into challenging situations frequently improves performance. Athletes call this choking under pressure, the way that excessive effort disrupts the natural flow of skilled action. The solution isn't to stop caring, but to care deeply while holding outcomes lightly. There's also the failure as success paradox, beautifully captured in the saying, fail fast, fail often, fail forward. In rapidly changing environments, the ability to quickly identify what doesn't work becomes more valuable than always being right. Failure becomes a form of success when it provides crucial information and eliminates unworkable approaches. The perfectionism paradox reveals how the desire to do everything perfectly often prevents you from doing anything well. Perfectionism creates paralysis by making the standards for starting so high that you never begin. Paradoxically, accepting good enough often leads to excellence because it allows for iteration and improvement. The competition paradox suggests that focusing on beating others often prevents you from performing at your best, while focusing on your own excellence often outperforms the competition automatically. This applies whether you're running a business, pursuing artistic goals, or developing personal skills. Success itself contains paradoxes. Achieving external goals often fails to provide the satisfaction we expected, while finding meaning in the process of pursuing goals often brings fulfillment regardless of outcomes. The journey versus destination paradox suggests that treating goals as directions rather than destinations creates both better results and greater satisfaction. The recognition paradox appears when people discover that seeking approval and recognition makes them less likely to receive it, while focusing on contribution and service often brings unexpected acknowledgement. This isn't a strategy for getting recognition. It's recognition that authentic satisfaction comes from the work itself rather than from external validation. As we near the end of our exploration, let's consider what might be the meta-paradox underlying all others. The fact that learning to live skillfully with uncertainty often provides more security than futile attempts to eliminate uncertainty altogether. Modern life presents unprecedented complexity and rapid change that makes traditional approaches to security increasingly ineffective. Jobs that seem stable disappear. Relationships that felt permanent end. Health that seemed guaranteed fails. Beliefs that felt absolute shift. Yet this recognition of impermanence, rather than being depressing, can become the foundation for a more flexible and resilient approach to living. The uncertainty paradox suggests that trying to control outcomes often increases anxiety and decreases effectiveness, while accepting uncertainty often increases both peace of mind and actual influence. This isn't passive resignation, but active engagement with life as it actually is, rather than as we wish it were. This paradox appears in financial planning, where over-diversification can reduce returns while moderate risk often provides better security. It shows up in career development, where remaining too specialized can create vulnerability, while developing adaptable skills provides stability. It manifests in relationships, where demanding guarantees often pushes people away, while accepting natural evolution often deepens bonds. The health paradox demonstrates how obsessive attention to avoiding illness can create anxiety-related symptoms, while reasonable precautions combined with acceptance of bodily vulnerability often supports better overall well-being. The very stress of trying to control health outcomes can undermine the health you're trying to protect. Perhaps most importantly, the uncertainty paradox applies to your relationship with your own future. Planning and working toward goals while simultaneously accepting that outcomes depend on factors beyond your control creates the optimal balance between agency and surrender. This doesn't mean becoming passive or fatalistic. Instead, it means investing full energy in what you can influence while releasing attachment to specific results. This paradoxical approach often produces both better outcomes and greater satisfaction than more controlling strategies. So how do you actually live these insights? How do you integrate paradoxical thinking into the practical demands of daily life without becoming paralyzed by complexity or lost in abstract philosophical speculation? The key is developing what we might call paradoxical wisdom, the ability to act decisively despite uncertainty, to commit deeply while holding lightly, to care passionately, while remaining unattached to outcomes. This begins with cultivating comfort in not knowing. Instead of rushing to resolve ambiguity, you can learn to rest in questions without demanding immediate answers. This doesn't mean being indecisive, but rather making decisions from a place of openness rather than rigid certainty. Practice holding multiple perspectives simultaneously without needing to synthesize them into a single view. You can understand your friend's point of view while maintaining your own. You can appreciate the benefits of your current job while exploring new opportunities. You can accept yourself as you are while working toward growth. Develop sensitivity too when paradoxical approaches might be more effective than linear ones. If direct effort isn't working, consider indirect approaches. If trying to change something is creating resistance, experiment with acceptance. If seeking happiness is creating dissatisfaction, focus on meaning instead. Learn to recognize and interrupt either or thinking patterns. When you catch yourself believing you must choose between two alternatives, pause and ask whether both might be partially true or whether a third option might exist that transcends the apparent conflict. Cultivate what Buddhists call don't know mind, a state of alert openness that doesn't grasp after certainty but remains available to whatever wisdom might emerge. This isn't ignorance, but sophisticated recognition that reality is far more mysterious than our conceptual frameworks can capture. Most importantly, remember that paradoxical wisdom isn't about understanding these ideas intellectually, but about embodying them in your daily choices and responses. The goal isn't to become a philosophical expert, but to live more skillfully, compassionately, and authentically. As we've journeyed through these 10 philosophical paradoxes, you might notice something interesting happening in your own thinking. The very process of engaging with contradictions begins to loosen rigid mental patterns and open up new possibilities for understanding and action. This is the transformative power of paradox. It doesn't just change what you think about, but how you think. It develops cognitive flexibility that serves you in every area of life. When you're comfortable with paradox, you become more creative in problem solving, more resilient in facing challenges, and more adaptable to changing circumstances. The paradoxes we've explored aren't meant to be solved like math problems. They're meant to be lived as ongoing practices in sophisticated thinking and authentic being. Each one offers a different lens for examining the assumptions you might not have known you were making about reality. Identity, choice, and meaning. The ship of Theseus continues to ask, what makes you, you? The Sorites paradox keeps questioning, where exactly do you draw the lines that organize your experience? Zeno's paradoxes wonder, how do you move forward when perfectionism creates paralysis? The Liar paradox inquires, how seriously should you take your own thoughts about yourself? The paradox of choice challenges, how do you choose well in a world of infinite options? The Bootstrap paradox suggests, how do you create new realities through circular causation? The paradox of tolerance asks, how do you remain open while maintaining boundaries? The paradox of hedonism wonders, what actually creates satisfaction? The paradox of knowledge continues, What is wisdom in an age of information overload? And the paradox of free will ultimately questions: how do you balance agency with acceptance, effort with surrender, responsibility with compassion? These aren't questions you answer once and move on from. They're ongoing practices in living more consciously, more skillfully, and more authentically. They're invitations to dance with mystery rather than demanding that reality conform to your preferred logical structures. The ultimate goal of our exploration isn't to make you more confused about life, but to make you more sophisticated in how you engage with its inherent complexities. Becoming a paradoxical thinker means developing the capacity to hold multiple truths simultaneously, to act decisively despite uncertainty, and to find stability in the midst of constant change. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. Like any skill, paradoxical thinking develops through practice. Start small. Notice when you're thinking in either/or terms, and experiment with both/and formulations. When you're stuck on a problem, ask what the opposite approach might look like. When you're certain about something, explore what you might not be seeing. Pay attention to areas of your life where you experience tension between seemingly opposing values or desires. Instead of trying to resolve these tensions immediately, spend time exploring them. What might they be teaching you? How might both sides contain important truths? Practice holding your opinions more lightly. This doesn't mean becoming wishy-washy or losing your convictions, but rather recognizing that your perspectives are partial views of reality rather than complete truths. This humility paradoxically often strengthens rather than weakens your ability to influence positive change. Develop comfort with uncertainty and ambiguity. Life rarely provides the clear-cut answers we crave. Yet we must continue making decisions and taking action despite incomplete information. Learning to navigate uncertainty skillfully is perhaps the most practical result of engaging with philosophical paradoxes. Most importantly, remember that paradoxical thinking isn't an intellectual exercise. It's a way of being more fully alive to the complexity and beauty of existence. It allows you to embrace both the light and shadow in yourself and others, to find meaning in both success and failure, to discover freedom within constraints. And here we encounter our final paradox. How do you conclude an exploration of ideas that resist conclusion? How do you summarize insights that point beyond summary toward direct experience? The truth is, we haven't really ended our journey through these philosophical paradoxes. We've simply paused in our ongoing relationship with them. These questions will continue evolving as you live them, as you encounter new situations that test and refine your understanding. If this exploration has been successful, you're leaving with more questions than answers. More curiosity than certainty, more comfort with mystery than need for explanation. This isn't a failure of philosophy, but its greatest success, opening you to the wonder and complexity of being alive. The 10 paradoxes we've explored represent just a small sample of the contradictions and mysteries that permeate human experience. Every field of inquiry, from quantum physics to neuroscience to psychology to art, encounters similar patterns where reality refuses to conform to our logical expectations. Rather than being discouraged by this, we can be inspired. We live in a universe so rich and complex that our most sophisticated thinking tools can only scratch its surface. This means there's always more to discover, always deeper to go, always new ways to understand what it means to be human. The practical value of philosophical paradoxes isn't in solving them, but in letting them reshape how you engage with life's ongoing questions. They're tools for developing the kind of wisdom that serves not just in abstract contemplation, but in the messy, careful, contradictory experience of being alive. As you leave this exploration and return to your daily life, carry these paradoxes with you, not as burdens to bear, but as companions for the journey. Let them remind you that the most important questions don't have simple answers, that the deepest truths often come wrapped in contradictions, and that wisdom lies not in having everything figured out, but in learning to dance skillfully with mystery. Before we conclude, let's explore a modern paradox that's particularly relevant to our digital age. The way technology simultaneously connects us more than ever before, while often leaving us feeling more isolated and disconnected. Consider how social media platforms promise to bring us closer together. Yet research consistently shows that heavy social media use correlates with increased loneliness, depression, and social anxiety. We have access to billions of people through our devices. Yet many report feeling more alone than previous generations who had access to far fewer people, but deeper, more sustained connections. This isn't simply a matter of technology being good or bad. It's a genuine paradox where the same tools that enable connection can also prevent it. Video calls allow us to maintain relationships across vast distances, while potentially making us less present with the people physically near us. Dating apps provide access to thousands of potential partners, while making it harder to commit to and develop deep intimacy with any single person. The information paradox adds another layer. We have unprecedented access to knowledge and perspectives from around the world. Yet many people report feeling less informed and more confused than ever. The abundance of information, rather than clarifying reality, often makes it harder to distinguish truth from falsehood. Expertise from opinion, news from entertainment. There's also the efficiency paradox of modern technology. Labor-saving devices and productivity tools were supposed to give us more leisure time. Yet most people report feeling busier and more stressed than previous generations. Email and smartphones, designed to make communication easier, often create pressure for constant availability and immediate responses. The paradox extends to artificial intelligence and automation. These technologies promise to free us from mundane tasks so we can focus on more meaningful work. Yet they also threaten to eliminate many forms of meaningful work entirely. They can enhance human capabilities while simultaneously making us question what uniquely human contributions remain valuable. Understanding this technological paradox is crucial for navigating modern life skillfully. It suggests that the solution isn't to reject technology or embrace it uncritically, but to develop more conscious relationships with our tools. We can use technology to enhance human connection rather than replace it, to access information more skillfully rather than consuming it mindlessly. This requires the same kind of paradoxical thinking we've been exploring throughout our journey. We can be grateful for technological capabilities while setting boundaries around their use. We can appreciate the conveniences of modern life while intentionally preserving space for slower, deeper forms of engagement. Another contemporary paradox worth examining is the relationship between progress and meaning. By most objective measures, human life has improved dramatically over the past century. We live longer, have better medical care, more educational opportunities, greater material prosperity, and more freedoms than most of our ancestors could have imagined. Yet rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide have increased significantly in developed countries. Many people report feeling that life lacks meaning or purpose. Despite having more opportunities and options than any previous generation, this creates the puzzling situation where objective improvements in life conditions coincide with subjective feelings of emptiness or dissatisfaction. Part of this paradox stems from what psychologists call the hedonic treadmill, the tendency for increased prosperity to raise expectations proportionally, leaving overall satisfaction levels relatively unchanged. As basic needs are met, we adjust our baseline and begin taking previous luxuries for granted while focusing on new desires. But the paradox goes deeper than material adaptation. Progress itself seems to undermine some sources of meaning that were available to previous generations. When survival required daily effort and community cooperation, life's purpose seemed more obvious. When religious and cultural traditions provided clear frameworks for understanding existence, questions of meaning were partially answered by inherited wisdom. Modern progress has freed us from many constraints, while also removing many sources of automatic meaning. We must now create purpose rather than inherit it, choose values rather than receive them, construct identity rather than accept predetermined roles. This freedom is simultaneously liberating and overwhelming. The paradox suggests that meaning doesn't come automatically from improved conditions, but must be actively cultivated. This requires the kind of paradoxical thinking we've been exploring. The ability to appreciate progress while recognizing its limitations. To embrace freedom while creating meaningful constraints. To value individual choice while acknowledging our need for connection and shared purpose. Understanding this paradox can help you navigate the particular challenges of modern life. Instead of expecting external improvements to automatically create internal satisfaction, you can take responsibility for cultivating meaning through your choices, relationships, and contributions. You can appreciate the benefits of modern life while intentionally preserving, or creating sources of purpose that transcend material comfort. Our relationship with knowledge and expertise presents another fascinating modern paradox. We live in an age where information is more accessible than ever before. Yet distinguishing between reliable and unreliable sources has become increasingly difficult. Anyone can publish content that looks authoritative, and complex issues are often reduced to competing soundbites rather than nuanced analysis. This creates the paradox where greater access to information can lead to less understanding rather than more. People can cherry-pick data to support any position, creating echo chambers where confirming evidence is amplified and contradicting evidence is ignored. The democratization of information publishing, while valuable in many ways, has also democratized misinformation. At the same time, genuine expertise remains crucial for navigating complex challenges like climate change, public health, economics, and technology policy. Yet experts often disagree with each other, and their recommendations sometimes change as new evidence emerges. This creates public skepticism about expertise itself, leading some people to dismiss professional knowledge entirely, while others accept it uncritically. The paradox deepens when we consider that many important life decisions can't be resolved through expertise alone. Questions about career choices, relationship decisions, parenting approaches, and personal values require wisdom that transcends technical knowledge. Yet the modern emphasis on data-driven decision-making can make us feel that all choices should be optimizable through better information. Social media algorithms complicate this further by showing us content designed to maximize engagement rather than accuracy or nuance. Information that provokes strong emotional reactions, whether positive or negative, spreads more widely than careful analysis. This means that the most visible information is often the least reliable for making thoughtful decisions. Navigating this paradox requires developing what we might call metacognitive skills. The ability to think about thinking, to evaluate sources of information, and to recognize the limits of both expertise and personal opinion. This includes learning to distinguish between questions that have factual answers and questions that require value judgments or personal wisdom. It also means developing comfort with uncertainty in areas where clear answers aren't available. Instead of seeking definitive guidance from experts or dismissing expertise entirely, you can learn to gather relevant information while taking responsibility for making decisions that align with your values and circumstances. Perhaps one of the most personally relevant paradoxes of modern life involves the tension between authenticity and social adaptation. We're encouraged to be ourselves and follow our authentic path. Yet we also need to function effectively within social and professional systems that often reward conformity and predictability. This creates genuine dilemmas. How authentic can you be in job interviews, professional meetings, or social gatherings where complete honesty might harm your relationships or opportunities? How do you balance self-expression with social responsibility? When does adapting to social expectations represent healthy flexibility? And when does it represent betraying your true self? The paradox is compounded by the fact that identity itself is partially constructed through social interaction. You discover who you are partly through how others respond to you. which means that authentic self-expression and social adaptation aren't completely separate processes. The self you're trying to be authentic to is partly shaped by the social contexts you navigate. Social media intensifies this paradox by creating platforms for self-expression that are simultaneously public performances. People craft online personas that feel authentic to them while being aware that they're presenting curated versions of themselves to audiences. The line between authentic expression and strategic self-presentation becomes increasingly blurred. There's also the paradox of authentic relationships in contexts where everyone is trying to be authentic. If authenticity becomes a social expectation, then conforming to expectations of authenticity might itself be inauthentic. The pressure to be genuine can create performances of genuineness that feel hollow. The way through this paradox isn't to resolve the tension between authenticity and social adaptation, but to hold both needs consciously. You can develop the capacity to be appropriately authentic, expressing yourself genuinely, while being sensitive to context and impact on others. This might mean being fully honest about your thoughts and feelings with close friends, while being more diplomatic in professional settings. It could involve expressing your values clearly, while remaining open to how those values might evolve through relationship and experience. The key is developing self-awareness about when you're adapting consciously versus when you're losing touch with your own experience. Healthy social adaptation preserves your core sense of self while allowing flexibility and expression. Unhealthy adaptation involves losing connection with your own values, feelings, and preferences. The relationship between security and freedom presents one of the fundamental tensions of human existence, manifesting in both personal life choices and broader social policy debates. We desire both safety and autonomy, yet these values often seem to conflict with each other. At the personal level, this paradox appears in career decisions. Stable jobs with good benefits provide security, but might limit opportunities for growth, creativity, or following your passions. Entrepreneurship or artistic pursuits offer more freedom, but less predictable income and benefits. The choice isn't simply between good and bad options, but between different values that both matter. The same tension appears in relationships. Commitment provides emotional security and depth, but limits your freedom to explore other connections or experiences. Complete freedom preserves all your options, but might prevent you from experiencing the unique satisfactions of deep commitment. Financial decisions embody this paradox as well. Saving money provides security for future uncertainties, but limits present enjoyment and experiences. Spending freely allows you to enjoy life now, but might create future insecurity. The optimal balance depends on factors like age, health, family responsibilities, and personal values that can't be reduced to simple formulas. At the societal level, the security-freedom paradox appears in debates about everything from public health measures to economic policy to civil liberties. Measures that increase collective security often involve some limitation of individual freedom, while maximizing individual freedom can create collective vulnerabilities. The paradox becomes particularly acute in times of crisis, when the trade-offs between security and freedom become more visible and consequential. Public health emergencies, economic instability, and security threats all create pressure to limit freedoms in service of safety. Yet these limitations can threaten the very values they're meant to protect. Rather than resolving this tension through rigid adherence to either security or freedom, wisdom involves learning to navigate the dynamic balance between them. This requires recognizing that both values serve important human needs and that the optimal balance shifts depending on circumstances. In personal life, this might mean making different choices at different life stages. Taking more risks when you're young and have fewer dependents. Prioritizing security when you have family responsibilities. Perhaps embracing more freedom again as circumstances change. The paradox also suggests the importance of building what we might call secure bases for freedom. Creating enough stability in some areas of life that you can afford to take risks in others. Financial security might enable career risks, strong relationships might support personal growth challenges. Good health habits might allow for occasional indulgences. One of the deepest paradoxes of human existence involves the simultaneous need for individual identity and social connection. We want to be unique individuals while also belonging to communities. We seek to distinguish ourselves from others while desperately wanting to be understood and accepted by them. This tension manifests early in life as children work to develop their own identities while remaining connected to their families. Adolescence is particularly intense in this regard, as teenagers assert their independence while still needing parental support and guidance. The process of individuation, becoming your own person, paradoxically, requires relationship with others to be meaningful. In romantic relationships, this paradox creates the challenge of maintaining your individual identity while creating a shared life with another person. Healthy couples learn to support each other's individual growth, while building something together that neither could create alone. The relationship becomes a context for individual development rather than a limitation on it. Professional life presents similar challenges. You want to stand out and develop your unique contributions while also being a collaborative team member. Excessive focus on individual achievement can undermine the collaborative relationships that make meaningful work possible. Yet losing your individual perspective can make you less valuable as a contributor. The paradox extends to creative expression and intellectual development. Artists and thinkers often draw inspiration from traditions and communities while trying to develop their own unique voices. The most original work frequently emerges from deep engagement with existing forms rather than from attempts to create something entirely new in isolation. Cultural identity adds another layer to this paradox. People often want to honor their cultural heritage while also adapting to new environments and opportunities. This can create internal conflicts between loyalty to tradition and openness to change. Between group identity and individual expression. Social media intensifies this paradox by creating platforms where people simultaneously seek individual recognition and social validation. The desire to be unique can conflict with the algorithms that reward conformity to popular trends. People craft individual personas while desperately seeking likes, shares, and comments that indicate social approval. The way through this paradox isn't to choose between individuality and connection, but to recognize their interdependence. Your individual identity develops through relationship with others and becomes meaningful through contribution to something beyond yourself. Similarly, genuine connection with others requires bringing your authentic individual perspective to relationships. This suggests approaching both individual development and relationship building as complementary rather than competing priorities. You can pursue personal growth in ways that enhance your capacity for connection. You can engage in relationships that support rather than diminish your individual flourishing. The tension between careful planning and spontaneous response presents a practical paradox that affects how we approach everything from daily schedules to major life decisions. Both planning and spontaneity offer important benefits, yet they can seem mutually exclusive. Planning provides direction, efficiency, and security. It allows you to work toward long-term goals, coordinate with others, and make good use of limited time and resources. Without planning, life can feel chaotic and reactive, with important opportunities missed due to lack of preparation. Yet excessive planning can create rigidity that prevents you from responding skillfully to unexpected opportunities or changing circumstances. Overplanning can also create anxiety about deviating from schedules and reduce your capacity for presence and enjoyment of current experiences. Spontaneity, on the other hand, keeps you open to possibilities that couldn't be anticipated. It allows for creative responses to immediate situations and prevents life from becoming overly routine or controlled. Spontaneous experiences often provide some of life's most memorable and meaningful moments. But pure spontaneity without any planning can lead to missed opportunities, inefficient use of resources, and difficulty achieving goals that require sustained effort over time. It can also create problems for people who depend on you if you're constantly changing plans or failing to meet commitments. The paradox becomes particularly interesting when you consider that even spontaneity sometimes requires planning. Musicians spend years developing technical skills that allow them to improvise effectively. Athletes train extensively to be able to respond spontaneously during competition. The capacity for skillful, spontaneous response often emerges from disciplined preparation. Similarly, effective planning often requires the ability to adapt spontaneously when circumstances change. Rigid adherence to plans in the face of new information or unexpected developments can be counterproductive. The best planners build flexibility into their plans and remain alert to when spontaneous course corrections serve their deeper intentions. This paradox suggests that the optimal approach isn't to choose between planning and spontaneity, but to develop skill in both and wisdom about when each is most appropriate. Some situations benefit from careful preparation, while others call for immediate creative response. You might plan your overall direction while remaining open to spontaneous opportunities that align with your values and goals. You could establish routines and structures that create space for spontaneous experiences. You might prepare thoroughly for important events while remaining flexible about how you implement your preparation. The key is recognizing that planning and spontaneity serve different functions and can complement rather than compete with each other when applied skillfully. The relationship between teaching and learning presents fascinating paradoxes that have implications far beyond formal educational settings. These paradoxes affect anyone who wants to share knowledge, develop skills, or influence positive change in themselves or others. The fundamental teaching paradox is that you can't directly transfer knowledge or understanding from one mind to another. Teaching involves creating conditions where learning can occur, but learning itself must be done by the learner. This means that effective teachers often spend less time talking and more time creating experiences that allow students to discover insights for themselves. There's also the paradox that teaching something often deepens your own understanding of it. The process of explaining concepts to others forces you to examine your assumptions, identify gaps in your knowledge, and find new ways to articulate complex ideas. Many teachers report that they learn as much from their students as they impart to them. The authority paradox in teaching suggests that effective teachers must simultaneously establish credibility and expertise while remaining open to learning from their students. Too little authority undermines students' confidence in the material being taught, while too much authority can prevent the questioning and exploration that lead to genuine understanding. This paradox extends beyond formal education into parenting, mentoring, and leadership. Parents must provide guidance and structure while allowing children to make their own discoveries and mistakes. Mentors need to share their experience while recognizing that each person's path will be unique. Leaders must provide direction while empowering others to think independently and contribute their own insights. There's also the motivation paradox in learning. The subjects that are most important for long-term flourishing often aren't immediately engaging or obviously relevant. Skills like critical thinking, emotional regulation, and delayed gratification provide enormous benefits, but require sustained effort without immediate rewards. Meanwhile, immediately gratifying activities might provide little lasting value. This creates challenges for both teachers and learners. How do you make important but difficult subjects engaging? How do you maintain motivation for learning that won't pay off for months or years? How do you balance the need for immediate engagement with the importance of developing discipline and persistence? The paradox of expertise in teaching adds another layer of complexity. Deep expertise in a subject can sometimes make it harder to teach beginners, because experts have forgotten what it's like to not know the material. They might skip steps that seem obvious to them but are crucial for novices, or use terminology that's familiar to experts but confusing to beginners. Yet lack of expertise creates its own teaching limitations. Teachers need to know substantially more than what they're teaching in order to field questions, provide multiple explanations, and adapt to different learning styles. These teaching and learning paradoxes suggest approaches that embrace rather than resist the tensions involved. Effective teachers learn to hold their expertise lightly while remaining confident in their knowledge. They create structure while allowing flexibility, provide guidance while encouraging independence, share their passion while respecting students' own interests and motivations. As we near the end of our extended journey, let's explore some advanced techniques for developing and applying paradoxical thinking in sophisticated ways. These practices can help you integrate the insights we've discussed into increasingly skillful approaches to life's complexities. The perspective multiplication technique. When facing any challenging situation, systematically examine it from at least 5 different viewpoints before making decisions. Consider not just your own perspective, but how the situation might look to other people involved. 2 neutral observers, 2 people from different cultures or backgrounds, and from the perspective of your future self looking back. This isn't about becoming paralyzed by too many perspectives, but about developing the mental flexibility to see situations more completely before acting. Often, solutions emerge that wouldn't have been visible from any single perspective alone. The temporal paradox practice. Learn to hold short-term and long-term perspectives simultaneously when making decisions. Ask yourself, what would I do if I only had to live with the consequences for one day? What would I do if I had to live with them forever? Often, the tension between these perspectives reveals important considerations that might otherwise be overlooked. This practice is particularly valuable for decisions about health, relationships, career, and financial choices where immediate and long-term consequences might point in different directions. The values integration exercise. When facing conflicts between important values such as honesty and kindness, independence and connection, security and growth, spend time exploring how both values might be honored rather than choosing one over the other. Look for creative solutions that serve multiple values simultaneously. For example, if you value both honesty and kindness when giving difficult feedback, explore how to communicate truthfully in ways that demonstrate care for the other person's well-being and growth. The assumption reversal method. Regularly examine your fundamental assumptions about important areas of life and deliberately explore what might be true if the opposite were the case. If you assume that hard work always leads to success, explore situations where this might not be true. If you believe that conflict is always harmful to relationships, investigate how it might sometimes strengthen them. This isn't about becoming cynical or abandoning useful beliefs, but about maintaining flexibility and openness to complexity. The dynamic balance approach. Instead of seeking static solutions to paradoxes, learn to see them as dynamic systems that require ongoing adjustment. Like riding a bicycle or sailing a boat, navigating paradoxes often involves constant small corrections rather than finding a fixed position. Apply this to areas like work-life balance, which isn't a destination you reach, but an ongoing dance that requires regular attention and adjustment as circumstances change. The meta-perspective cultivation. Develop the ability to observe your own thinking patterns and emotional reactions from a slightly detached perspective. When you notice yourself becoming rigid or reactive, pause and ask, what would it look like to hold this more lightly? How might I be limiting my options by the way I'm framing this situation? This metacognitive awareness is perhaps the most powerful tool for applying paradoxical thinking in real time as challenges arise. As we look toward the future, the ability to navigate paradoxes will likely become even more important than it is today. The rapid pace of technological change, increasing global interconnection, and growing complexity of social and environmental challenges all point toward a world where paradoxical thinking becomes an essential life skill. Artificial intelligence presents us with numerous paradoxes that will require sophisticated thinking to navigate wisely. AI systems can enhance human capabilities while potentially replacing human workers. They can provide powerful tools for solving problems while creating new risks and ethical dilemmas. They can democratize access to information and capabilities while potentially concentrating. Power in the hands of those who control the technology. Climate change embodies paradoxes that require both individual and collective responses. Personal actions matter and don't matter. Individual choices are simultaneously crucial for modeling change and insufficient for addressing the scale of the challenge. We need both technological solutions and behavioral changes, both adaptation to inevitable changes and efforts to prevent further damage. The globalization of culture and economy creates paradoxes around identity and belonging. People can maintain strong local connections while participating in global communities, preserve cultural traditions while adapting to changing circumstances, appreciate diversity while finding common ground across differences. Economic systems increasingly present paradoxical challenges as well. Automation can reduce the need for human labor, while requiring humans to find new forms of meaningful work. Global markets can provide unprecedented opportunities while creating new vulnerabilities and inequalities. The sharing economy can increase efficiency and access while undermining traditional forms of security and benefits. These future challenges suggest that education should increasingly focus on developing paradoxical thinking skills alongside technical knowledge. Students need to learn not just facts and procedures, but how to navigate uncertainty, hold multiple perspectives, and make good decisions with incomplete information. The businesses and organizations that thrive in increasingly complex environments will likely be those that can embrace paradoxes rather than avoiding them. They'll need to balance efficiency with resilience, innovation with stability, global reach with local responsiveness, individual excellence with collaborative success. On a personal level, the future will likely require even greater comfort with ambiguity, change, and complexity. The most adaptive individuals will be those who can maintain stable core values while remaining flexible in their approaches, who can commit deeply to relationships and projects while remaining open to evolution and change. Throughout our extensive exploration, we've seen how philosophical paradoxes aren't just intellectual curiosities, but practical tools for personal transformation. Let's consider how engaging with these paradoxes can catalyze real changes in how you experience and navigate life. The transformation begins with recognizing that many of your habitual ways of thinking and responding may be based on false dichotomies, assumptions that you must choose between alternatives that might actually be compatible. This recognition alone can be tremendously liberating. It's opening up possibilities that weren't visible when you believed you had to pick sides. For many people, the ship of Theseus paradox transforms their relationship with personal change. Instead of clinging to fixed self-concepts or feeling guilty about evolving perspectives, they learn to embrace the ongoing process of becoming. This shift can unleash tremendous energy that was previously bound up in trying to maintain consistency with past versions of themselves. The paradox of choice often leads people to develop healthier relationships with decision-making. Instead of endlessly researching options or constantly second-guessing themselves, they learn to make good decisions quickly and then invest energy in making those decisions work well. This change alone can dramatically reduce anxiety and increase life satisfaction. The Sorites paradox helps people become more comfortable with ambiguity in relationships, career development, and personal growth. Rather than demanding clear categories and definitions, they learn to appreciate the beautiful vagueness of important life experiences. This often leads to more satisfying relationships and less pressure to have everything figured out. Zeno's paradoxes transform how people approach overwhelming goals or challenges. Instead of being paralyzed by the magnitude of what lies ahead, they learn to focus on the next step while trusting in the process of gradual progress. This shift can be particularly powerful for creative projects, health goals, and skill development. The liar paradox changes people's relationships with their own thoughts and internal narratives. They begin to hold their self-concepts more lightly, recognizing that the voice in their head that judges and analyzes their experience has inherent limitations. This often leads to reduced self-criticism and increased self-compassion. Perhaps most importantly, Engaging with these paradoxes cultivates what we might call cognitive humility, the recognition that reality is far more complex and mysterious than our thinking minds can fully grasp. This humility paradoxically increases rather than decreases effectiveness, because it keeps you open to learning, adapting, and growing throughout life. As we conclude our journey, consider how you might integrate these insights into a coherent approach to living that honors both the complexity of existence and the practical need to make decisions and take action in the world. A paradox-informed life philosophy doesn't provide simple answers, but offers sophisticated ways of engaging with life's ongoing questions. It suggests approaches to major life domains that embrace, rather than resolve, fundamental tensions. In relationships, this philosophy embraces both intimacy and independence, both commitment and growth, both acceptance and the encouragement of positive change. It recognizes that the healthiest relationships exist in the dynamic space between fusion and separation, providing both security and freedom. In work and career, it balances passion and practicality, individual achievement and collaborative contribution, specialization and adaptability. It appreciates both the satisfaction of mastery and the excitement of learning new things, both the security of expertise and the growth that comes from facing unfamiliar challenges. In personal development, it holds both self-acceptance and the desire for growth, both effort and surrender, both planning and openness to surprise. It recognizes that the most profound changes often happen through indirect rather than direct approaches, through creating conditions for change rather than forcing specific outcomes. In spiritual or philosophical matters, it maintains both questioning and faith, both rational analysis and intuitive wisdom, both individual insight and connection to larger traditions of understanding. It can hold beliefs strongly while holding them lightly, committed to values while remaining open to how those values might evolve through experience. In facing uncertainty and difficulty, it cultivates both acceptance of what cannot be changed and commitment to influencing what can be changed. It develops resilience through embracing rather than avoiding life's inherent challenges and uncertainties. This philosophy doesn't eliminate difficulty or confusion from life, but it provides more skillful ways of navigating both. It offers the possibility of living with greater peace in the midst of complexity, greater effectiveness despite uncertainty, and greater satisfaction through embracing rather than resolving life's fundamental paradoxes. The goal isn't to become a perfect paradoxical thinker, but to develop increasing skill in dancing with the contradictions that make life both challenging and beautiful. Each paradox we've explored offers ongoing opportunities to deepen this dance, to find new levels of wisdom in situations you thought you already understood. Thank you for taking this extensive journey with me through the fascinating and transformative world of philosophical paradoxes. We've explored not just 10 specific paradoxes, but the entire landscape of paradoxical thinking and its applications to modern life. If this exploration has resonated with you, I'd love to hear about your experiences in the comments below. Which paradoxes spoke to you most strongly? How might you experiment with applying these insights in your own life? Have you noticed other paradoxes in your experience that we didn't cover today? The conversation doesn't end here. Philosophy is most meaningful when it's shared and explored together. Consider discussing these ideas with friends, family members, or colleagues who might appreciate the depth and complexity we've explored. Often, our understanding of paradoxes deepens through dialogue with others, who bring different perspectives and experiences. If you enjoyed this deep dive into philosophical paradoxes and their practical applications, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more content exploring consciousness, wisdom, and the profound questions that shape human experience. We regularly examine how ancient insights apply to contemporary challenges and how philosophical understanding can transform daily life.